this road trip, I start off as a courier. I load up my truck to the hilt to deliver some gifts to a family member in Texas. Of course, that means I'm going to be heading east, and we made it to the Cabazon dinosaurs, and it looks like one of them already has his Christmas outfit on. Thanksgiving was a few days ago, so I took some turkey stuffing, corn stuff, sweet potatoes, asparagus casserole, made individual little packets, froze it, stuck it in my lunchbox slow cooker when I started the trip, and by the time I crossed the Arizona border, I had a yummy hot Thanksgiving lunch. It was pretty doggone awesome. After lunch, we drove on through Arizona, made it to the New Mexico border to camp out in Gila National Forest. First thing in the morning, we set our destination to Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument. This little 2-lane road turned into a 1-lane road for about 15 miles, but it was pretty cool. I'm starting to see a pattern. It seems like all the national parks are located in, on, or near volcanoes. According to the USGS, there's approximately 161 volcanoes that are still considered active in the USA. Once I arrived and parked Miko at the visitor center of the Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument, I noticed this monument. Geronimo was born in the upper Gila River country on June 16, 1829. How fascinating. The visitor center had a very informative presentation. This is a remote, rugged, and seemingly wild landscape. Yet there, for thousands of years, a unique combination of natural features attracted humans to this place. The protection of caves, close access to the spring-fed creek and the Gila River. The climate was moderate, rarely experiencing extreme cold or heat as compared to the surrounding areas. It was a very good place for people to call home. Centuries of campfires wafted soot onto the cave ceilings, the telltale black cloak from the hearths that once brightened the nights and warmed cold winter days. Early villages were clusters of pit homes for members of extended families. Together they hunted, gathered, and raised crops, allowing them not only to survive, but to thrive in the Mogollon Mountain. The Gila River and Cliff Dweller Canyon Creek were reliable sources of water in a time of great need. It was at this time that construction started on the Gila Cliff Dwellings. The presentation goes on for about 16 minutes, but I think it's time to actually go visit them for ourselves. To put things in perspective, we're just east of the Arizona border in New Mexico, north of Silver City, and north of the I-10. Once I reached the trailhead, I was glad I had my electric heated jacket with me because it was cold, and the hike is about or just over a mile round trip. If you plan to visit, it is not level ground. There is a lot of narrow paths, and then once you get to the monument, there is some climbing involved. Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument is located in the Gila Wilderness on the headwaters of the Gila River in southwest New Mexico. The 533-acre National Monument was established by President Theodore Roosevelt through executive proclamation on November 16, 1907. The hike to the monument was fascinating. I think we crossed this little river or stream about 7 times on little wooden bridges. The Gila Cliff Dwelling National Monument is home to 2 prominent ruin sites among a collection of smaller sites located within the Gila Wilderness inside the Gila National Forest. The landscape of the monument ranges in elevation from about 5,700 to 7,300 feet above sea level and follows the West Fork and Middle Fork of the Gila River. The terrain around the ruins is rugged and arid. It contains steep-sided canyons cut by shallow spring rivers, mesas, and bluffs forested with ponderosa pine, Gamble's oak, Douglas fir, New Mexico juniper, pinyon pine, and alligator juniper, among others. The area's geological history stems from the volcanic activity that subsequently covered the area with ash. The monument's hot springs are remnants of this volcanic history. The first glimpse of the caves was pretty fascinating. I mean, they were massive. I had no idea. Developers made use of natural caves to build interlinking dwellings within 5 cliff alcoves above Cliff Dweller Canyon. Once you arrive at the Cliff Dwellings plain, I guess you might say, it was absolutely fascinating. The Cliff Dwellers are believed to have inhabited the region from between 1275 and early into the 14th century, during the Pueblo III era. It is not known why the community was abandoned. Archaeologists have identified 46 rooms in the 5 caves on Cliff Dweller Canyon and believe they were occupied by 10 to 15 families. The Hart Bar site, or the TJ Ruins, named for the former ranch from which the mesa takes its name, located on the TJ Mesa, are largely unexcavated. Here on the ceilings you can see the black soot. It is super thick and it's stuck to those rocks. It is amazing. Tree ring dating determined that the wood used in the dwellings were cut between 1276 and 1287. The region provided for growing, gathering, and hunting food. The views from inside the caves are just amazing. Can you imagine this is your view from your front door? Absolutely beautiful. This is a description of the hike here. To visit the dwellings, visitors are required to hike a well-traveled 1-mile-long trail with several footbridges over a stream. The hike begins at an elevation of about 5,600 feet and ends at 5,875 feet. Local Native American Indians were aware of the location of the ruins. The first European contact with the cliff dwellings was by Henry B. Allman. As it goes, in the summer of 1878, Allman and several friends were summoned to serve for jury duty. In an effort to avoid the summons, they organized a prospecting trip to the Gila River, where they subsequently came upon the site. Throughout the following years, many visitors would study the dwellings. Soon the site became more accessible, and in the 1890s, the Hill brothers had established a resort at the nearby Gila Hot Springs. The Hill brothers would bring the first tours to the ruins for their guests. In June 1906, Republican John F. Lacey of Iowa and chairman of the House of Public Lands Committee introduced a bill for the regulation of prehistoric sites. This primitive ladder you see here, as well as others located throughout the site, is so that visitors can climb up and look over into each of the dwellings. However, don't go in because there's no ladder to get out. The Act for Preservation of Antiquities, commonly known as the Antiquities Act, authorized the U.S. President to set aside land that contained prehistoric and historic ruins by executive order. Several mummified bodies have been found at the cliff dwellings location, though most were lost to looters and private collectors. In 1912, a burial ground was found. A mummified infant, later referred to as Zeke, was located. This discovery gained national attention and increased the monument's popularity and visitor numbers. In turn, additional improvements were made in the following years. The mummy is the only known mummy to be acquired by the Smithsonian from the monument. I would assume this perfect cylindrical hole was where a log once was to help hold up a roof. Pretty fascinating. And over here you can see where a log once laid here in the adobe. The first park ranger was Doc Campbell, an early settler to the region. He helped the National Park Service crews stabilize the ruins. The Campbells still guide wilderness trips from their Campbell's Post in nearby Gila Hot Springs. Here's an example of one of the ladders you get to climb to get up into those structures. It's pretty crazy. To be fair, on the far end that you see way down there is a proper set of stairs to climb up. However, if you come in from the other side of the trail, you won't see those first, like I did. And this is a good example of the type of steps to get up to the dwellings. Administration of the monument was transferred from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to the National Park Service on August 10, 1933. President Kennedy would later sign Proclamation number 3467 that added approximately 375 acres and contained the TJ site as well as an additional wilderness area. In the spring of 1975, the National Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service signed a cooperative agreement where the Gila National Forest is responsible for administration of the monument, but it returned to the National Park System in 2003. I hope you enjoyed visiting the Gila cliff dwellings as much as I did. I know, I was fascinated by it. So I reached back to the trailhead, and yep, I was cooking my Thanksgiving dinner once again in my lunchbox crock pot, and boy was it good. As I headed out of the park, I didn't realize how cold it really was there. As I came around the shaded side of a bend, I saw this. Driving through Texas was a challenge. I think the car manufacturers opted not to include turn signals in the vehicles sold in Texas. I made it to my destination, dropped off the gifts, played with the puppies, and said I wanted some real Texan barbecue. So we headed on out, and what an experience that was, and it was yummy. The next night we headed to Legacy West in Plano, Texas for another yummy dinner at an Italian restaurant, and then some real Italian, oh my gosh, gelato. It was so yummy. If you've never had it, you must give it a shot. Anyhow, good times were had by all. And then the next night I wanted barbecue again, so we went to Hutchinson's. Oh my gosh, kicks butt on any other barbecue I've had. The Texas Twinkie, amazing. This food is fantastic. Yummy. The next morning it was time to go, so I said goodbye to the puppies.
What?
And headed on out, but not without a quick stop at the world famous Buc-ee's. I guess it's true what they say about Texas. Everything's bigger. I've never seen such a huge gas station. And $2.29 a gallon. Holy moly. I made it all the way to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I promptly crashed. And the next morning woke up to tour the Manhattan Project. As luck would have it, the visitor center was closed. But I did find my way over to the Los Alamos History Museum, which turned out to be a great surprise. The Manhattan Project National Historical Park is run jointly by the National Park Service and Department of Energy. The site dates back to 1150 with adobe ruins, then turns into the Los Alamos Ranch School, then the Manhattan Project. The Los Alamos Ranch School was a private school for boys in the northwest corner of Los Alamos County, founded in 1917. During World War II, the school was bought and converted into the secret nuclear research campus for Project Y. This cabin was at a nearby mesa. They took it apart, brought it here to the museum, and reconstructed it by the adobe ruins. The school was founded in 1917 by Detroit businessman Ashley Pond Jr., father of Peggy Pond Church, the New Mexican poet and author. It offered a program modeled after the Boy Scouts of America, combining a college prep curriculum with a rigorous outdoor life. All students were organized into patrols of Troop 22 and wore scout uniforms and neckerchiefs. Obtaining first-class rank in the Boy Scouts was a requirement for graduation. The student had barracks but were never allowed to sleep inside. They all slept on the porch, whether it was raining, snowing, or a beautiful sunny day. New Mexican architect designed the school's Fuller House, now Fuller Lodge, in 1928. It was constructed from some 770 ponderosa pine and aspen logs. This is an original light fixture, and as you can see, anything military, there's the remains of the building number that it was tagged with. Here is a view of the Manhattan Project area, and out of all the buildings around Ashley Pond, this building is the only surviving structure, and it is now the visitor center. As I continued the walking tour, I passed this row of homes. Then this was the barracks for the school, then became the barracks or homes for the military. And the nice thing about the homes lined up on this road called Bathtub Row is they were the only barracks or homes with bathtubs. And as you can see, the military ID numbers are still tagged. And then I arrived at the Oppenheimer House. J. Robert Oppenheimer, born April 22nd, 1904, died February 18th, 1967, was an American theoretical physicist. The house was not open to the public, so you had to look through the windows, which caused a kind of crazy glare, but at least we could get a chance to see inside. A professor of physics at the University of California, Berkeley, Oppenheimer was the wartime head of the Los Alamos laboratory and is often called the father of the atomic bomb. Just a few miles away from the Manhattan Project is the Valles Caldera, or Jimenez Caldera. It is a 13.7 mile wide volcanic caldera in the Jimenez Mountains of northern New Mexico. The highest point in the caldera is Redondo Peak, 11,253 foot resurgent lava dome located entirely within the caldera. Also within the caldera are several grass valleys. In 1975, Valles Caldera was designated as a National Natural Landmark by the National Park Service. NASA used the caldera in October to November of 1964 and again in September of 1966 to geologically train the Apollo astronauts in recognizing volcanic features. If you're wondering how cold it is, well, this little area of water is frozen. This is a view of leaving the caldera up on a ridge looking into it. It is massive. And this is a view a few miles away. We were up over and inside those far mountains that you see, or the ridge of the caldera. Outlined in green is the Valles Caldera, and where we're heading is the Bandelier National Monument. Bandelier National Monument is 33,677 acres near Los Alamos, New Mexico. The monument preserves the homes and territory of the ancestral Pueblonians of a later era in the Southwest. Most of the Pueblo structures date to two eras between 1150 and 1600 AD. through the thicket of brush, you can make out the ruins here. This is the foundations of the thriving city that was just below the cliff dwellings. The monument is 50 square miles on the slopes of the Jimenez volcanic field. Over 70% of the monument is wilderness, with over 1 mile of elevation change from about 5,000 feet along the Rio Grande to over 10,000 feet at the peak of the Cerro Grande on the rim of the Caldera. There are 3 miles of roads and more than 70 miles of hiking trails. The monument protects ancestral Pueblo archaeological sites, a diverse and scenic landscape, and the country's largest National Park Service Civilian Conservation Corps National Landmark District. Wow, that was a mouthful. 2/3 of the park, about 23,267 acres, is designated as the Bandelier Wilderness Area. Motorized travel and permanent structures are forbidden in the wilderness. The Pueblo Loop trails about just under 1.5 miles through the Frioles Canyon. The path consists mostly of a concrete sidewalk until you get to the base of the cliff dwellings, which there is quite a few steps and narrow passages, and to actually look inside, you will be climbing up these wooden ladders that you'll see here in a minute. Bandelier was designated by President Woodrow Wilson as a national monument on February 11, 1916, and named for Adolf Bandelier, a Swiss-American anthropologist who researched the cultures of the area and supported preservation of the sites. The round holes you see lined up on the face of the cliff here is where logs were once placed to make structures at the base of the cliff dwellings. Here's an example of the steps that you need to climb to get up and to be able to look inside these caves. Much of the area was covered with volcanic ash, the Bandelier tuff, from an eruption from the Valles Caldera volcano 1.14 million years ago. The volcanic overflow varied in hardness. The ancestral Pueblonians broke up the firmer materials to use as bricks while they carved out dwellings from the softer materials. Human presence in the area has been dated to over 10,000 years ago, and settlements by ancestors of the Pueblonian people have been dated to 1150 CE. These settlers have moved closer to the Rio Grande by 1550. The distribution of basalt and obsidian artifacts from the area, along with other trade goods, rock markings, and construction techniques, indicate its inhabitants were part of a regional trade network that included what is now New Mexico. To get a good look inside these caves, you actually have to climb these wooden ladders. The difference between this area and the Gila cliff dwellings is they're mostly single or double rooms for each cave entrance, where on the Gila dwellings you could walk through the inside through many large rooms, all linked together. On the outside of the cliff dwellings, there are some drawings and petroglyphs. In fact, here I found 2, but you have to look really close. There's kind of a spiral design on the top of the screen there, and what looks like a bird, maybe a duck. Spanish colonial settlers arrived in the 18th century. Jose Montoya brought Adolf Bandelier to visit the area in 1880. Looking over the cliff dwellings, Bandelier said, "It's the grandest thing I ever saw." The park's infrastructure was developed in the 1930s by crews of Civilian Conservation Corps and is a National Historic Landmark for its well-preserved architecture. The National Park Service cooperates with the surrounding pueblos and other federal agencies and the state agencies to manage the park. After visiting both the Gila and Bandelier cliff dwellings, they're both fascinating but much different in their own right. Los Alamos, Manhattan Project, the Caldera, and Bandelier are all in north central New Mexico, about a 40-minute drive from Santa Fe. Just a side note, when you're leaving Los Alamos to visit the Caldera and Bandelier, you will be going through the Manhattan Project military grounds, and there are signs everywhere to let you know do not cross over the fence. You do have to show ID and a possible vehicle search to enter. The next morning, I left the Santa Fe area and headed across the 40 and arrived at the Petrified Forest National Park. It was quite a surprise. I didn't realize I would be going through the Painted Desert first, so it was a double whammy, and I was very excited. The Painted Desert starts near the east end of the Grand Canyon National Park and southeast into the Petrified Forest National Park. It's most easily accessed from the north portion of the Petrified Forest National Park. The Painted Desert is known for its brilliant and varied colors. These include the more common red rock, but also shades of lavender. Much of the Painted Desert within the Petrified Forest National Park is protected as the Petrified Forest National Wilderness Area. The park offers both easy and longer hikes into the colored hills. I chose the short hike option because it was really cold early in the morning. The Painted Desert continues north into the Navajo Nation. Did you know Navajo is a Spanish adaptation word meaning farm fields in the valley? Entering the park north of the 40, you weave around the Painted Desert and then go back under the 40 where there is a little monument here about Route 66. Route 66 winds 2,448 miles from Chicago to LA. Through most of the western states, Route 66 follows Interstate 40, which eventually replaces much of the Mother Road. Petrified Forest National Park is located in the Navajo and Apache counties of northeastern Arizona. Named for its large deposits of petrified wood, the park covers about 346 square miles. Newspaper Rock is neither a newspaper nor a single rock. The site boasts over 650 petroglyphs covering a group of rock faces within a small area. High concentration of petroglyphs like this marks a place as hugely significant. Many generations of people saw these markings and contributed their own. The petroglyphs were created by ancestral people living, farming, and hunting in the area between 650 and 2,000 years ago. You weren't allowed to hike down to the petroglyphs, but I found kind of a big one and I zoomed in so you can kind of get an idea that all of these rock faces really have these faint petroglyphs carved into them. It's pretty cool actually. Averaging about 5,400 feet in elevation, the park has a dry, windy climate with temperatures that vary from summer highs of about 100 degrees to winter lows well below freezing. This section of the drive is called the teepees. I tried to do research to find out why, but I can only assume it's the shape of the little hills here. This area is called the Blue Mesa. It's a 3.5-mile loop drive, and wow. Now, the colors here are amazing. The video doesn't quite show it, but there's blues and grays and lavenders. It is just beautiful. And here it is, the first huge petrified log. Look at that sucker, and look at the pieces that have fallen down into the valley below. That is amazing. More than 400 species of plants, dominated by grasses such as bunch grass and blue grama, are found in the park. What looks like a road down there is actually a steep 1-mile walking trail. Mom, check out the colored layers. Isn't that spectacular? So beautiful. Animals such as pronghorns, coyotes, and bobcats, smaller animals such as deer mice, snakes, lizards, even 7 kinds of amphibians, more than 200 species of birds, some of which are permanent residents and many of which are migratory. About 1/3 of the park is designated as wilderness. That's about 50,260 acres. Here at Jasper Forest, you really do finally see that this once was an actual forest, not just a few trees. Just look at all the stumps and logs over this area. It's just fantastic. The Petrified Forest is known for its fossils, especially fallen trees that lived in the late Triassic epoch about 225 million years ago. Finally, an area you can hike to and go down and see these petrified logs up close. And you call them logs. They may look like logs, but they're hard as stone. Petrified tree or wood from ancient Greek, meaning rock or stone, literally wood turned into stone. It is the result of a tree having been replaced by stone via a mineralization process. The organic materials making up cell walls have been replicated with minerals, mostly silica in the form of opal or quartz. If you enter the park off of the 40, you travel southwest down to Holbrook. You'll see plenty of rock formations, and the more south you drive, the more petrified trees as well. Arriving at the Crystal Forest, finally, a forest you can actually walk through. This is fascinating. The petrifaction process occurs underground. When wood becomes buried in water, saturated sediments, or volcanic ash. The presence of water reduces the availability of oxygen, which inhibits aerobic decompression by bacteria and fungi. Mineral-laden water flowing through the sediments may lead to permanization, which occurs when minerals precipitate out of solution, filling the interiors of the cells and other empty spaces. In some instances, the original structure of the stem tissue may be partially retained. Unlike other plant fossils, which are typically impressions or compressions, petrified wood is a 3-dimensional representation of the original organic material. Hiking through the Crystal Forest was absolutely spectacular. For as far as the eye can see, you see remnants of the forest. And right next to the paths are the trees that are right there. I mean, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. You really have to turn your imagination on and way up to visualize this being a lush, green, wet, damp forest. Some of the movies that were filmed in the Petrified Forest and Painted Desert are Dark Winds of 2022, The Outlaw Josie Wales 1976, The Thief of Baghdad 1940, A Time for Killing 1967, A Distant Trumpet 1964, The Painted Desert of 1931, Roaming Through Arizona in 1944, and the classic Grapes of Wrath of 1940. The Painted Desert and Petrified Forest was declared a national monument in 1906 and a national park in 1962. In 2018, the park received 644,922 visitors. Everybody wants a piece of the Petrified Forest. Don't be like this guy, all right? Just go to the gift shop and buy yourself a piece. That's what I did. There is a problem with the Petrified Forest disappearing from visitors. Let's help preserve this park. The Petrified Forest National Park is an easy drive and an easy place to visit. I had a ball. Well, I made it to Quartzsite, Arizona, set up camp, had my last Thanksgiving dinner, and headed home in the morning. It was an amazing trip. Love you, Mom.